Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching the rescue ships pull away from the burning Kytherian colony ship. Another successful evacuation. Another act of mercy that would likely go unnoticed by the Galactic Council. She pressed her lips into a thin line as the medical bay reports filtered through her neural implant. 67 Kytherian civilians saved. 3 human crew members in critical condition from radiation exposure during the rescue. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same Kytherians who had voted to limit human expansion rights just 2 cycles ago were now alive, because humans had risked everything to save them from their own failing reactor core. Captain Rodriguez appeared beside her, his weathered face reflecting the orange glow of the dying ship in the distance. Medical says Martinez might not make it, Rodriguez said quietly. Took a full dose of gamma radiation pulling those kids out of the reactor section. Chen closed her eyes briefly. Martinez was barely 22, fresh out of the academy with dreams of exploring the galaxy. Now he was dying because humans couldn't stand by and watch innocent beings suffer, even when those beings consistently worked against human interests in the Council. That makes 47 this year, Chen murmured. 47 humans who've died or been permanently disabled saving other species. And how many times have other species returned the favor? Rodriguez asked, though they both knew the answer. 0. In the 12 years since humanity had joined the Galactic Council, not once had another species risked their own people to save humans in distress. Oh, they sent thoughts and prayers, offered token relief supplies, and praised human courage in flowery speeches. But when the shooting started, when the disasters struck, when humans needed actual help, the galaxy found excuses to look the other way. The communication console chimed with an incoming transmission from Earth. Chen accepted it, and Admiral Harrison's stern face appeared on the hologram. Behind him, she could see the familiar blue marble of humanity's homeworld, still beautiful despite the orbital defense platforms that now surrounded it like a metallic crown. Commander Chen, I've received your report on the Kytherian rescue. Outstanding work as always, Harrison began. But Chen could see the frustration in his eyes. However, I need to brief you on recent developments in the Altair sector. The hologram shifted to show a tactical display of star systems. Red markers indicated conflict zones, yellow showed areas of political tension, and a single green marker represented the human fleet position, always on the periphery, always responding to crises rather than preventing them. The Zephyrian Empire has begun aggressive expansion toward the Centauri trade routes, Harrison continued. 3 colony worlds have already fallen, and refugees are fleeing toward human space. The Council has requested our assistance in evacuation operations. Chun felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. What about military intervention, sir? The Zephyrians are committing genocide on those worlds. Harrison's expression darkened. The Vorthan hegemony and the Stellar Federation have both declined to commit military forces. They claim the situation is politically complex and requires diplomatic solutions. The Council vote was 8-3 against military action. Let me guess. Humanity, the Altarians, and the Free Miners Coalition were the 3. Correct. We're being asked to clean up another mess while the major powers protect their trade agreements with the Zephyrians. Harrison paused, studying Chen's face through the transmission. Sarah, I know what you're thinking. We all are. But we can't abandon our principles because others lack the courage to act. Chen turned back toward the viewport, watching as the last rescue shuttle docked with the Harmony. In the distance, the Kytherian colony ship finally succumbed to its reactor failure, breaking apart in a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the nearby star. Beautiful and terrible, like so much of what humanity had witnessed since joining the galactic community. Sir, permission to speak freely? Always, Commander. How long do we keep being everyone's rescue service while they vote against our interests at every turn? Our people are dying to save beings who would rather see us contained to our little corner of the galaxy. At what point does mercy become stupidity? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that Chun had never heard before. That's a question that's being debated in every human government right now. The Council of Earth, the Colonial Assembly, even the independent worlds are asking the same thing. The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with Rodriguez and the distant stars around them. The crew of the Harmony continued their work, treating injured Kytherians, processing refugee requests, and preparing for the next crisis that would inevitably call them away from their own priorities. Rodriguez moved to stand beside her at the viewport. You know what bothers me most about all this? What's that? It's not that they don't help us. I can understand species looking out for their own interests first. It's that they actively work against us while expecting us to save them when things go wrong. The Kytherians vote to restrict our mining rights, then call for human rescue ships when their colonies fail. The Vorthans block our trade proposals, then demand human medical supplies when plague hits their outer worlds. She nodded slowly. She had seen the pattern developing over the years, but it had taken this moment, watching another human sacrifice himself for ungrateful aliens, to crystallize her growing frustration. They've learned to game the system, push us down politically, knowing we'll still come running when they need us. And we always do, because that's who we are. That's who we've been, Chen corrected. But patterns can change. In the medical bay 3 decks below, Martinez died quietly, surrounded by the Kytherian children he had saved. They didn't even know his name. The Kytherian captain sent a formal thank you message to the human fleet, 5 sentences of diplomatic politeness that would be filed away and forgotten by the time they reached the next system. Chen made a decision that would echo through the galaxy in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She activated her personal communication array and began composing a message to every human ship captain, colony administrator, and government official she knew. The message was simple, but would prove to be revolutionary. Fellow humans, I've watched Martinez die today, saving people who vote against our rights tomorrow. I've seen our principles twisted into a tool for our own oppression. It's time we had a conversation about what mercy really means and whether unconditional kindness is the same as wisdom. We need to talk. The message went out across human space, carried by quantum relays and personal networks, reaching thousands of human leaders within hours. What Chen didn't know was that her words would find fertile ground in minds that had been wrestling with the same questions across dozens of human worlds. On Europa Station, Admiral Thompson read the message while reviewing casualty reports from the latest rescue mission. On New Geneva, President Martinez's widow received it just hours after being told her husband had died saving ungrateful aliens. On the mining world of Kepler 442, colonists read it while watching Galactic Council peacekeepers enforce trade restrictions that would leave their children hungry. The conversation Chun had called for began immediately, spreading through human space like wildfire. And, for the first time since joining the galactic community, humanity began to seriously question whether their greatest strength might also be their greatest weakness. The galaxy was about to learn the difference between human mercy and human justice. They wouldn't like the lesson. 3 weeks after Commander Chen's message sparked the great human conversation, the galaxy received its first hint that something fundamental had changed. The signs were subtle at first. Human rescue ships taking longer to respond to distress calls, human diplomats asking harder questions in council sessions, human trade representatives demanding reciprocal agreements rather than accepting one-sided deals. Ambassador Elizabeth Warren sat in the circular chamber of the Galactic Council, watching the familiar ritual of deflection and delay play out before her. The Zephyrian Empire had now conquered 7 worlds in their aggressive expansion, but the Council was still debating the wording of a strongly worded resolution. Around her, representatives from dozens of species engaged in the careful dance of appearing concerned while avoiding actual commitment. The situation requires a measured response, intoned Council Speaker Vector, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's blue light. We cannot rush to judgment without considering all perspectives. Warren almost laughed. All perspectives except those of the millions of beings being slaughtered or enslaved by Zephyrian forces. She had attended these sessions for 3 years now, watching the same pathetic performance repeat with different crises. The Council would debate, form subcommittees, request studies, and eventually pass a meaningless resolution that would be filed away and ignored. Meanwhile, everyone would look expectantly at the human representative, waiting for her to volunteer Earth's resources to clean up the mess. Ambassador Warren, called the Vorthan representative, his voice carrying its characteristic hiss. Surely the Terran Federation will assist with refugee evacuation efforts? Your people have such experience with humanitarian operations. There it was. The expectation that humanity would once again bear the cost of everyone else's cowardice. Warren stood slowly, her movement causing a ripple of attention through the chamber. Representatives leaned forward, ready to hear humanity volunteer its ships, its people, its resources to solve yet another problem the Council was too weak to address. The Terran Federation will not be providing evacuation services for this crisis, Warren said simply. The chamber fell silent. In the 3 years of her appointment, Warren had never uttered those words. No human ambassador ever had. Several representatives looked confused, as if they had misheard her. Speaker Vectar's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. Perhaps there was a translation error? The Terran Federation will not provide evacuation services. You heard correctly. We will not be sending our ships, risking our people, or spending our resources to rescue beings from a situation you refuse to address with military force. Warren remained standing, her voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the chamber. If the Council considers this situation too politically complex for intervention, then humanity must respect the Council's wisdom. The Kytherian representative shot to his feet, his scaled features showing panic. But, Ambassador, who will handle the evacuations? The casualties will be enormous. Indeed, they will be. I suggest the Council consider that reality when making its decisions about military intervention. Warren gathered her materials with deliberate calm. Humanity will be reviewing its humanitarian policies in light of recent voting patterns in this chamber. We've noticed an interesting correlation between species that regularly vote against human interests and species that frequently require human rescue services. The implications hit the chamber like a shock wave. The Altarian representative began frantically whispering to her aide. The Free Miners Coalition representative smiled grimly. They had been humanity's most consistent allies and knew they would be unaffected by this change. But representatives from the Vorthan hegemony, the Kytherian Republic, and a dozen other species looked genuinely terrified. Warren walked toward the exit, then paused at the chamber's threshold. Oh, and counselors? My government has asked me to remind you that the annual review of the Seoul Defense Treaty comes up for renewal in 6 months. We'll be examining whether our current mutual defense obligations still serve the interests of all parties involved. She left them with that thought. The Seoul Defense Treaty was humanity's guarantee to defend Council worlds from external threats, a commitment that had prevented 3 major wars through the mere threat of human military intervention. The idea that humanity might withdraw from that agreement sent waves of panic through species that had grown comfortable hiding behind human protection while undermining human interests. Back on Earth, President Chun, no relation to Commander Sarah Chun, met with the Emergency Council in the secure bunker beneath Geneva. The room's holographic displays showed the real-time status of human forces across the galaxy. Red indicators marked distress calls that would normally trigger immediate human response. For the first time in galactic history, those calls were being ignored. Status report, President Chin commanded. Admiral Harrison materialized via hologram from Fleet Command. 47 distress calls in the last 72 hours. Requests for rescue operations, medical assistance, and disaster relief. Our ships are holding position and maintaining communication silence. Casualties, unknown. We're not monitoring the situations closely enough to provide accurate estimates. Harrison's expression was grim, but determined. I won't lie, Madam President. This goes against every instinct our people have developed. Fleet crews are struggling with standing down while beings die. Secretary of State Nakamura leaned forward. That's exactly the response we need to see from other species. If they're comfortable letting beings die for political convenience, why should we be the only ones who can't stomach it? Because that's what makes us human, Admiral Harrison replied. The question is whether we can afford to be human in a galaxy that punishes us for it. President Chin studied the tactical displays, watching distant crises unfold without human intervention. Admiral, I need a full assessment. What would happen if humanity completely withdrew from galactic humanitarian operations? Chaos, Madam President. Complete chaos. Human ships handle roughly 70% of all emergency evacuations, medical assistance missions, and disaster relief operations in this sector. If we stop tomorrow, the casualty rates would increase by orders of magnitude. And military implications? Without the Seoul Defense Treaty, at least a dozen worlds become vulnerable to Zephyrian expansion. The Vorthan hegemony would face immediate pressure on their outer colonies. The Stellar Federation would lose their most reliable military partner. Harrison paused. But, Madam President, our own colonies would also become more vulnerable. We've relied on Council intelligence networks and early warning systems. Defense Secretary Williams spoke up from across the table. We've been analyzing that risk. Our assessment is that humanity's enemies would be too busy dealing with immediate threats to their own territories to focus on human expansion. Chaos works in our favor if we're strong enough to protect ourselves. President Chen stood and moved to the large holographic display showing human space. Green markers indicated the 57 human worlds, each protected by increasingly sophisticated defenses. Blue markers showed human fleets, positioned strategically throughout their territory. What struck her most was how compact and defensible human space appeared compared to the sprawling, vulnerable territories of other species. We've spent 12 years trying to be the galaxy's conscience, she said quietly. Maybe it's time we focused on being its most successful species instead. The message from the meeting went out through encrypted channels to human commanders across the galaxy. New protocols were established. Humanitarian assistance would be provided only to species with favorable voting records in council sessions. Military protection would be reserved for allies who reciprocated. Trade agreements would be strictly enforced without the generous interpretation humanity had previously offered. The galaxy began to feel the change immediately. A Vorthan medical emergency that would normally trigger immediate human response was met with a polite suggestion to contact other council members. A Kytherian mining disaster received humanitarian aid only after the Kytherian government publicly apologized for their previous votes against human expansion rights. Most shocking of all, when the Zephyrian Empire moved against the Stellar Federation's outer colonies, humanity declined to honor their mutual defense agreement, citing the Federation's recent vote against human mineral rights in the Centauri sector. For the first time in galactic history, species that had grown comfortable with human protection found themselves facing the consequences of their political choices. The age of unconditional human mercy was ending, and a new era of calculated human justice was about to begin. The galaxy was learning that humans could be patient, forgiving, and merciful. But they were about to discover that these qualities had limits, and those limits had finally been reached. The first real test came 6 weeks after humanity's policy shift began. The Procyon Research Station, a joint scientific venture studying stellar formation, sent out a priority distress signal. 17 species had researchers aboard the station, including 12 humans. A cascade failure in the station's fusion reactor threatened to consume the entire facility within hours. Admiral Sarah Chun, recently promoted after her message had catalyzed the human awakening, stood on the bridge of her flagship, the U.S. Retribution. The ship's name had been considered aggressive when it was commissioned, but now it seemed prophetic. Around her, the bridge crew waited for orders that everyone knew would define humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. Confirm the species breakdown aboard the station, Chen ordered. Lieutenant Commander Torres checked his display. 47 total personnel. 12 humans, 8 Vorthans, 7 Kytherians, 6 Altarians, 4 representatives each from the Stellar Federation, Crystalline Hegemony, and Free Miners Coalition, plus 2 Zephyrian observers. Chen studied the tactical display. The research station hung in space like a dying star, venting plasma and radiation from its failing containment systems. Under the old protocols, human ships would already be en route, risking everything to save every soul aboard regardless of their species' political allegiances. Display the voting record matrix, she commanded. A holographic chart materialized, showing how each species represented on the station had voted on key issues affecting humanity over the past year. The pattern was stark and undeniable. The Vorthans had opposed human expansion rights in 4 separate votes. The Kytherians had consistently voted against human trade proposals. The Stellar Federation had blocked human mining rights just 3 weeks ago. Only the Altarians, Free Miners Coalition, and, surprisingly, the Crystalline Hegemony had shown consistent support for human interests. The Zephyrians, of course, were actively at war with half the galaxy. Communications from the station, Admiral, reported the communications officer. Multiple species requesting immediate evacuation assistance. Patch me through to the station, Chen ordered. When the connection was established, she could see the chaotic emergency center of the research facility. Beings from multiple species worked frantically at emergency stations while emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across their varied forms. Procyon Research Station, this is Admiral Chun of the Terran Fleet. We have received your distress call. Dr. Vex Han, the Vorthan Station Commander, appeared on the screen, his reptilian features showing obvious relief. Admiral Chun, thank the void you're here. We have less than 3 hours before complete reactor failure. Request immediate evacuation of all personnel. Negative, Station Commander. The Terran Fleet will evacuate human personnel, Altarian personnel, Free Miners Coalition personnel, and Crystalline Hegemony personnel. Transport for other species must be arranged through their own governments. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Vexhan's scales shifted from green to a pale yellow that Chen recognized as a sign of extreme distress in Vorthans. Admiral, surely you can't be serious. There are children aboard this station. Researchers who have dedicated their lives to advancing galactic knowledge. Chen felt the familiar weight of moral responsibility, the same feeling that had driven humanity to save countless ungrateful beings over the years. But she also felt something new, a cold clarity about the price of unconditional mercy. Dr. Vexhan, the Vorthan Hegemony voted against human expansion rights in the Kepler sector just last month. Your government specifically stated that humans were too aggressive for unsupervised colonization. We're simply respecting your government's assessment of our character. But this is a humanitarian crisis. Yes, it is. I suggest you contact your government and request immediate evacuation support. Perhaps the same species that voted with you against human interests will prove as reliable in emergencies as they are in council sessions. Chen cut the transmission and turned to her tactical officer. Status of Allied personnel on the station? 18 total. 7 Altarians, 6 Free Miners, for Crystalline Hegemony, and are 12 humans. Evacuation can be completed in 40 minutes with minimal risk to our ships. And the others? 29 personnel from species currently classified as politically hostile to human interests. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present understood the mathematics of the situation. Under the old protocols, humanity would risk ships and lives to save all 47 beings. Under the new approach, they would save 18 and leave 29 to whatever fate their own governments could arrange. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Torres spoke quietly. The Altarian freighter Blessed Traveler is requesting permission to assist with evacuations. Captain Zarheli says her cargo bay can accommodate additional refugees. Chen smiled grimly. The Altarians had been humanity's most consistent allies, often standing alone with humans against council majorities. Their offer to risk their own people to save others demonstrated the kind of reciprocal courage that humanity had been seeking for years. Grant permission and provide escort. Any other ships responding? Negative, Admiral. No other species have dispatched vessels to the area. The next 2 hours unfolded with surgical precision. Human ships docked with the research station and began evacuating personnel with strict adherence to the new protocols. Allied species were given priority boarding, with their most vulnerable members, children, elderly, and injured, transferred first. The Altarian freighter proved invaluable, its captain demonstrating the kind of selfless courage that had made the Altarians humanity's closest friends. As the evacuation proceeded, frantic communications flooded the emergency channels. Vorthan Command claimed their nearest ships were 18 hours away. Kytherian Central insisted they had no vessels in the sector. The Stellar Federation explained that their ships were engaged in vital supply runs and couldn't be diverted. Dr. Vexhan appeared on screen again, this time with visible desperation. Admiral Chun, our governments cannot reach us in time. Please, I'm begging you to reconsider. Chen studied the Vorthan's face, seeing genuine fear and desperation. These were the moments that had always driven humanity to heroic acts of mercy, regardless of political calculations. But she also remembered Martinez, dying to save Kytherian children whose government would vote against human interests within the week. Doctor, I want you to transmit a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them that the Terran Federation has learned valuable lessons about the relationship between political cooperation and humanitarian assistance. We're simply applying the same standards of selective concern that other species have demonstrated toward humanity. You're condemning innocent beings for their government's decisions. Yes, Chen replied simply. The same way your government condemned human colonists to starvation when they voted against our food shipment requests last year. The same way the Kytherian Republic condemned human medical researchers to die of plague by blocking our vaccine development proposals. We're treating you exactly the way you've treated us. The final evacuation shuttle departed the station with the last of the Allied personnel. Chun watched as the research station's reactor finally failed, consuming the facility in a brilliant flash that could be seen across 3-star systems. 29 beings died in that flash. Scientists, researchers, and support staff whose only crime was belonging to species that had consistently voted against human interests. The galaxy's reaction was immediate and explosive. Emergency council sessions were called. Human ambassadors were recalled by outraged governments. Accusations of genocide and war crimes filled diplomatic channels. But, for the first time in galactic history, humanity's response was unified and unrepentant. President Chun addressed the galaxy from Earth, her words broadcast to every inhabited world. For 12 years, humanity has bled and died to rescue beings whose governments work tirelessly to limit our growth and prosperity. We have been the galaxy's emergency service while being treated as its greatest threat. No more. From this day forward, humanity will extend the same level of humanitarian concern to other species that those species have shown to us. We will be as quick to render aid as you are to support our interests. We will be as willing to risk our people as you are to defend our rights. The age of unconditional human mercy is over. Welcome to the age of human justice. The galaxy had spent decades taking humanity's compassion for granted, assuming that human nature would always compel them to save lives regardless of political consequences. They were about to learn that human nature was far more complex than they had imagined, and that mercy without reciprocity was just another form of exploitation. The fire they were about to face would be forged from years of accumulated frustration, disappointment, and betrayal. And, unlike the gentle warmth of human compassion, this fire would show no mercy to those who had never shown any in return. The Zephyrian Empire's war machine had grown bold in the 3 months since humanity withdrew from galactic peacekeeping. Without the threat of human military intervention, Zephyrian forces had conquered 12-star systems and showed no signs of slowing their expansion. Their next target was the Vorthan colony world of New Serpentia, home to 4 million civilians, and the Vorthan hegemony's primary industrial base. Fleet Admiral Harrison stood in the war room deep beneath Earth's surface, watching real-time intelligence feeds from the Vorthan sector. Zephyrian assault fleets were massing just outside the system, preparing for what would likely be the largest military operation in recent galactic history. Around the holographic display, human military leaders observed with the detached interest of spectators rather than participants. Zephyrian fleet composition? Harrison inquired. 47 heavy cruisers, 18 dreadnoughts, and over 200 escort vessels, reported Intelligence Director Park. Full invasion force with planetary bombardment capability. The Vorthans have requested emergency council intervention. And the council's response. Debate scheduled for next week. The usual committee formations and fact-finding missions. By the time they finish talking, New Serpentia will be radioactive ash. General Martinez leaned over the tactical display, studying the force dispositions. Sir, under our previous agreements, this situation would trigger immediate military response. The Seoul Defense Treaty specifically covers threats to Council member worlds. Would have covered, Harrison corrected. We withdrew from that treaty last month after the Vorthans voted against our mining rights in the Centauri sector. Again, the irony was exquisite. The same Vorthans who had spent years opposing human expansion were now facing extinction because they no longer had human protection. Their own military was impressive on paper, sleek ships with advanced plasma weapons and energy shields that could deflect most conventional attacks. But they had grown soft during the years of relying on human defense, and their forces were positioned defensively rather than prepared for the kind of brutal warfare the Zephyrians specialized in. Incoming transmission from the Vorthan hegemony, the communications officer announced. Priority channel from Supreme Leader Cass-Seth herself. Harrison nodded. Put her through. The hologram materialized, showing the distinctive reptilian features of the Vorthan leader. Her scales had shifted to the deep purple that indicated extreme distress, and her voice carried a desperation that human leaders had grown familiar with in recent months. Fleet Admiral Harrison, I am contacting you directly to request immediate military assistance. The Zephyrian Empire threatens total annihilation of New Serpentia. 4 million innocent lives hang in the balance. Harrison studied her face impassively. Supreme Leader, the Terran Federation is no longer bound by mutual defense agreements with the Vorthan hegemony. I believe your government terminated those agreements through its voting patterns in recent council sessions. Admiral, surely past political disagreements cannot outweigh humanitarian concerns. We are talking about genocide on an unprecedented scale. Indeed we are. The same scale of genocide that humanity requested council intervention for in the Rigel sector last year. The Vorthan hegemony voted against military action at that time, stating that such conflicts were internal matters best resolved through diplomatic channels. Cass-Seth's scales shifted to an even deeper purple. That was different. The situation was more complex. How so? The political implications were unclear. Military intervention could have destabilized the entire region. Harrison almost smiled. And yet when its Vorthan lives at stake, the political implications become irrelevant? How convenient. Admiral, I am prepared to offer immediate policy changes. Full support for human expansion rights, favorable trade agreements, whatever you require. How generous. Of course, these same offers could have been made years ago when humanity was requesting basic fairness in council votes. Why should we believe your conversion is genuine rather than opportunistic? The transmission continued for another 10 minutes, with Cass-Seth becoming increasingly desperate as Harrison remained unmoved. Finally, the Vorthan leader played what she clearly thought was her strongest card. Admiral, if you do not act, the blood of 4 million innocents will be on human hands. The galaxy will remember that humanity chose politics over compassion. Harrison's expression hardened. Supreme Leader, let me be absolutely clear about something. The blood of those 4 million beings is on Vorthan hands. Your government's hands. You spent years ensuring that humanity would not be in a position to help you when this moment came. You voted against our expansion, restricted our trade, and opposed our military positioning in border regions. You systematically weakened the very alliance that could have protected you. But you made your choices, Supreme Leader. Now live with the consequences. Or die with them. The decision is yours. Harrison terminated the transmission and turned to his staff. The war room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant rumble of Earth's defensive systems cycling through their daily tests. Sir, General Martinez spoke carefully. The moral implications of this decision will reverberate for generations. We're essentially condemning millions of beings to death or slavery. No, General. We're allowing millions of beings to face the consequences of their government's decisions. There's a difference. Harrison moved to the strategic display, highlighting human fleet positions across the galaxy. For 12 years, we've protected beings who actively worked to limit our growth and prosperity. We've been the galaxy's shield while being treated as its greatest threat. That shield is being withdrawn. And if the Zephyrians turn toward human space after consolidating Vorthan territory, Harrison smiled grimly. Then, they'll discover why every species in the galaxy has been so concerned about human military capabilities. We've been holding back for years, trying to be good neighbors. But if the Zephyrians want to test human resolve when we're fighting for our own survival rather than someone else's ingratitude, they're welcome to try. Defense Minister Okafor pulled up classified fleet strength reports. Sir, Our current force projections show human military capability exceeding combined Zephyrian and Vorthan fleets by significant margins. We've been underrepresenting our strength in official reports to avoid alarming the Council. Exactly. Every species has been so worried about human aggression that they've worked to contain us while depending on us for protection. They created their own worst fear, a humanity with no reason to show restraint toward ungrateful neighbors. The attack on New Serpentia began 18 hours later. Human surveillance networks provided real-time coverage of the orbital bombardment, the ground invasion, and the systematic destruction of Vorthan resistance. It was brutal, efficient, and exactly the kind of warfare that the Galactic Council's peace-loving species had no experience defending against. Desperate communications flooded human channels as the battle raged. Other species begged humanity to intervene. Emergency council sessions demanded immediate human action. Threats and bribes were offered in equal measure. Humanity watched it all with cold detachment. The battle lasted 4 days. When it was over, New Serpentia was a conquered world, its population enslaved or dead, its industries converted to Zephyrian war production. The Vorthan hegemony had lost its most important world, and nearly half its military in a feudal defense. But the real victory wasn't Zephyrian. It was human. For the first time in galactic history, a major species had fallen without human intervention. The impossible had happened. The galaxy's conscience had simply watched and done nothing while millions died. The psychological impact rippled through every council chamber, every trade negotiation, every diplomatic meeting. Other species began to realize that their safety had never been guaranteed by laws or treaties or mutual interests. It had been guaranteed by human compassion, human courage, and human willingness to sacrifice for strangers. And that guarantee had just been revoked. The galaxy was about to learn what it looked like when humanity stopped being merciful and started being practical. The fire that was building would consume more than just Vorthan worlds. It would burn away the comfortable assumptions that had governed galactic politics for over a decade. And humanity would use that fire to forge a new kind of galactic order, one where mercy was earned rather than expected, and where those who stood with humans in dark times would find themselves protected by the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. 6 months after New Serpentia fell, the galaxy had fractured into clear divisions. The Zephyrian Empire, drunk on easy victories against undefended worlds, had expanded to control 30 star systems. The traditional powers, Vorthan hegemony, Kytherian Republic, Stellar Federation, found themselves desperately forming mutual defense pacts they should have created years ago. And humanity watched from the sidelines, no longer the galaxy's savior, but something far more dangerous, its judge. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the UES Retribution, now flagship of the largest human fleet ever assembled. Around her ship, 300 vessels of the Terran Navy maintained perfect formation, their weapons powered down but ready. They were positioned at the edge of the Altair system, where the most important battle in galactic history was about to unfold. The Zephyrian Empire had finally overextended itself. Their conquest of the Vorthan industrial worlds had provided massive military production capability, but it had also created a supply line that stretched across half the galaxy. More importantly, it had driven the scattered council species to do something they had never done before: unite against a common threat without expecting humanity to lead the charge. The Allied fleet that approached the Altair system was impressive by any previous galactic standard. 200 Vorthan ships with their distinctive plasma weaponry. 150 Kytherian vessels sporting improved shield technology. 300 ships from the Stellar Federation, including their massive carrier platforms. Even the minor species had contributed. The crystalline hegemony had provided 40 ships, and dozens of smaller powers had sent what forces they could muster. 800 ships in total, representing the combined military might of 2/3 of the galaxy's species. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the largest armada in recorded history. Under current circumstances, it was a desperate last stand by beings who had suddenly realized they could no longer count on human protection. Incoming transmission from the Allied fleet. Reported communications, Officer Torres. Admiral Vexhani of the Vorthan Navy requesting immediate human assistance. Chen smiled without humor. Admiral Vexhani was the same Vorthan who had commanded the fleet that blockaded human colonies during the Centauri crisis 3 years ago. His ships had prevented human medical supplies from reaching plague-stricken colonists, resulting in over 3,000 human deaths. The irony of him now begging for human help was almost poetic. Put him through. The reptilian features of Admiral Vexhani appeared on the main screen, his scales showing the deep gold coloration that indicated extreme stress in Vorthans. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship bustled with frantic activity as his fleet prepared for what everyone knew would be a brutal battle against superior Zephyrian forces. Admiral Chun, the Allied fleet requests immediate Terran assistance against the Zephyrian invasion force. Our intelligence indicates they have over 600 ships, including their newest dreadnought designs. Without human support, we cannot guarantee victory. Chen studied the tactical display showing the opposing fleets. The Zephyrians had indeed brought impressive forces, 600 ships with advanced weaponry and battle-hardened crews. Against the Allied fleet's 800 ships, it should have been a fair fight. But Chen knew better. The Allied species had spent so many years relying on human protection that they had never developed the kind of aggressive tactics necessary for major fleet engagements. Admiral Vexhani, the Terran Federation is currently neutral in this conflict. We have no defense agreements with the Allied powers. Admiral, surely you understand the stakes. If the Zephyrians win here, they'll control the majority of galactic territory. They'll be unstoppable. They'll control the majority of ungrateful galactic territory, Chen corrected. Species that spent years voting against human interests while expecting human protection. From our perspective, this is simply a case of previous political decisions reaching their natural conclusion. Vexhani's scales shifted to an even deeper gold. Admiral, I personally apologize for past Vorthan policies toward humanity. We were wrong. We should have supported human expansion and recognized your contributions to galactic stability. Interesting. And when did this realization occur to you? Before or after Zephyrian ships began targeting Vorthan worlds? The timing is unfortunate, but the timing is perfect, Admiral. For the first time in galactic history, species are being forced to face consequences without human intervention. It's educational. Chen was about to terminate the transmission when a new voice interrupted from the human bridge. Admiral, incoming priority transmission from the Altarian Defense Force. Captain Zarheli requesting permission to speak. Chen's expression softened slightly. The Altarians had been humanity's most consistent allies, standing with humans even when it cost them politically. Captain Zarheli had personally risked her ship to help evacuate civilians from the Procyon research station months ago. Put the captain through on a separate channel. Zarheli's distinctive blue-furred features appeared on a secondary screen. Unlike the desperate Admiral Vexhani, the Altarian captain appeared calm and dignified despite the approaching battle. Admiral Chun, I do not contact you to beg for assistance. The Altarian people chose to stand with humanity through years of council opposition, and we are prepared to face the consequences of that choice. But I wanted you to know that 47 Altarian ships will fight today to defend principles of cooperation and mutual respect that we learned from humanity. Chun felt something stir in her chest, the first genuine emotion she had experienced in months of cold political calculation. Captain, what is your fleet's tactical assessment? Honestly, without human support, we will likely be destroyed. But the Altarian people prefer to die free rather than live under Zephyrian occupation or council hypocrisy. The transmission ended, leaving Chun with a decision that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. Around her, the bridge crew waited silently, knowing that their admiral was weighing choices that went far beyond military tactics. Communications. Open a channel to all human ships. Channel open, Admiral. All ships. This is Admiral Chun. For 6 months, we have watched former enemies destroy each other while demanding our help. We have seen the galaxy's true face when human mercy is withdrawn. Today, species that worked against us for years face extinction, and they expect us to save them once again. She paused, looking out at the distant flashes of weapon fire as the two massive fleets engaged in battle. But today, we also see the Altarians, our true friends, fighting alone because they chose to honor their alliance with humanity even when it was politically costly. Today, we remember what it means to have real allies rather than fair-weather friends. Chen turned to her tactical officer. Signal the fleet. All ships, prepare for combat operations. We're going to save our friends and teach the galaxy the difference between justice and mercy. Admiral, Torres called out with obvious relief. The fleet is responding. All ships reporting ready for battle. Then, let's remind the galaxy why they were so worried about human military capabilities in the first place. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, 300 ships accelerating toward the massive battle already raging in the Altair system. But this wasn't the same kind of humanitarian rescue mission that humanity had conducted for years. This was something new, a calculated intervention designed to save allies while allowing enemies to face the consequences of their choices. As the human ships entered the battle zone, Chen opened communications to all fleets simultaneously, Allied, Zephyrian, and human. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Federation. Human forces are intervening in this battle for one purpose: to protect our Altarian allies. Any ship, regardless of species, that targets Altarian vessels will be considered an enemy of humanity and destroyed. All other combat is considered an internal galactic matter. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Zephyrian ships that had been closing on damaged Altarian vessels suddenly found themselves facing human dreadnoughts with weapons powered and targeting systems locked on. Allied ships that had been fighting desperately for survival suddenly had to consider whether attacking retreating Zephyrians might accidentally threaten Altarian vessels and draw human fire. The battle raged for 6 hours, but its outcome was never in doubt once humanity entered the fight. Zephyrian forces found themselves trapped between the hammer of Allied fleets and the anvil of human precision. But Chen's ships showed remarkable selectivity. They destroyed any vessel that threatened Altarian ships while allowing other combatants to fight among themselves. When the smoke cleared, the Zephyrian Empire had lost over half its fleet. The Allied forces had taken heavy casualties, but achieved victory. And the Altarians, humanity's true allies, had survived nearly intact under the protective umbrella of human power. But the real victory was political rather than military. For the first time in galactic history, humanity had demonstrated selective intervention, protecting friends while allowing enemies to suffer consequences. The galaxy would never again assume that human compassion was unconditional or that human mercy could be taken for granted. Admiral Chun addressed the surviving fleets as recovery operations began. The galaxy has learned an important lesson today. Humanity will still risk everything to protect our friends. But friendship is not given freely. It is earned through years of mutual respect and support. Choose your alliances wisely, because the age of universal human protection is over. The new galactic order was born in the fires of that battle. Species that had stood with humanity found themselves part of an alliance more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Species that had worked against human interests found themselves facing an uncertain future without the protection they had taken for granted for so many years. Humanity had traded mercy for justice, compassion for calculation, and universal protection for selective loyalty. The galaxy would spend the next century learning to live with the consequences of forcing humanity to make that choice. The fire that had been building for years had finally been unleashed, and it would burn away the old assumptions of galactic politics forever.